Good morning, everybody. Baruch Hashem, here we are, Kuntres Bikkur Chicago. We are currently in the middle of Ice Bays on the second chapter. Yes, we are. Okay, so we are on page 51. Yesterday, we finished a beautiful discussion about how to feed. We learned about feeding and sustaining ourselves, begashmis, right, with food and with drinks, and how important it is, and how, at the same time, how strange it is that Hashem makes a world. One second, let me just set up the Sfarim. Okay. That Hashem makes a world where something external, so to speak, less alive, less revealed godliness, is what feeds and sustains and connects and bonds our body with our neshama. And it's wondrous, and now is not the time to really think and sit down and understand it, but it's very interesting that we do these things such as eating and drinking, and that's what unifies and makes sure to make our body the right keli to contain the neshama. And so too, we're able to appreciate how even the most sensitive of organs, even the brain and the brain activity that happens, is actually nourished by this food that we eat. So therefore, we have to be very aware, very careful, very in tune with our bodies and what our body needs, and feed it the right things, not necessarily what, our nefesh bahamas or our body necessarily wants. Because again, many of us will eat a billion cheesecakes if we are given them, but to really realize and think more clearly about what we're intaking and how this is affecting our soul and body bond. And therefore, it's also affecting the way we perform throughout our day. Then we spoke about how this concept is really just a muscle to be able to understand the relationship of what it is to feed and sustain our emunah. We have to feed and sustain it. It doesn't just happen by itself. It's not just, light a match and suddenly you have a fire. You have to really work on it. You have to, blow at the embers. If anyone's ever gone, camping and has tried to make a bonfire on their own, it's a lot of work to be able to get from a tiny little spark to a real burning, warming up fire. And so too with our emunah, we have to work on that. We have to, and so the Friedrich Rebbe says we have to do it through Torah mitzvahs and through exertion, physical exertion and spiritual exertion. So physical exertion represents this aspect of I think I said physical first, so just making sure. Physical exertion represents this aspect of realizing that sometimes decisions we make are not necessarily what's best for us in a spiritual sense. So sometimes we're too tired to do something, or we, stay up crazy late and don't really make the right decision to go to sleep on time. You have to break ourselves from these negative habits that bring us down. So I was recently speaking to someone, and she was telling me how she's having such a hard time not being addicted to the news, because at first it was Corona, and then it's, reopening, not reopening, stages of reopening, how many things and whatever, and now it's the newest topics in the news, and the world is going upside down, and she has this constant need, she has this constant desire that she has to constantly be checking the latest news and seeing it from one perspective, the other perspective, the political perspective, and it's really holding her back. So this bodily need, this desire, this gashmius habit is really holding her back from being the best that she can be, from making the right decisions, from living a life that has more Hashem and less stress, if that makes any sense. So again, we have to realize that there are certain aspects in our lives that are our addiction to our phone, our addiction to staying up late, our addiction to all these crazy things, whatever it is that you feel, wow, this is really holding me back from my success. We need to try and break that and make that, take away from this aspect, and therefore to make this a physical we have to really attempt to bring our body and bring our nefesh Bahamas along to teach it and raise it, just like you raise a child, raise it to be able to appreciate the right things, the godly things. And through doing that, I'm going to take a moment and see that in a minute. So through doing that, through having that level of godliness, that you're able to really focus on what's important in your life and focus on what's going to bring out the best in you, as opposed to just doing things by rote because this is just what it is. That makes you make the right connections and feeds your emunah, and feeds and sustains your emunah. Also from the spiritual perspective, which is to actually make that time to feed yourself spiritually, to make that time. So kol hakavod to everybody watching this share right now. You made a time to feed your neshama, and therefore that also gives you emunah, because you're putting on your Hashem glasses. You're thinking about Hashem in a more consistent and constant, way, by making time to learn Torah, by making time to learn Chassidus, by making time to connect to Hashem in this way. So we have to do it from just like eating and drinking, right? That's eating, then there's drinking, and so too there's physical exertion and spiritual exertion through adding in turn mitzvahs, taking away from things that hold us back and add negativity to our lives. Sir Mirav Asay Tov, taking away from negativity and adding in positivity. By doing this, we feed that ember of godliness, we feed that ember of emunah, and we grow it into a nice, beautiful, warm fire. There was a question, it wasn't exactly a topic, this is just a review, but some could argue that listening to the news is good for spirituality because we can use the knowledge to connect to other people. Are there signs of when something that could be good is too much? Absolutely. And so basically the question is, some could say that listening to the news is a wonderful and beautiful spiritual thing because having that knowledge, we can use that knowledge to connect to other people. So yes and no. I mean, some could also say that by knowing whatever. Okay. I'm not saying to live under a rock for the rest of your life. I'm just saying to be aware and conscious of what listening to the news in such a strong way, how it affects you. Many people, if the first thing they touch in the morning is their phone and they get all these notifications of all this, craziness happening in the world, it is much harder, and I can prove it to you because I've been there, I've done that. It is much harder to have a sensitivity to godliness, to have a sensitivity and an awareness that Hashem is in charge and Hashem's the one taking care of us, when the first thing we feed ourselves is something that is very news, gashmi, is negative, whatever. So we have to be very careful where we put ourselves. And not only that, but we have to be aware, and I've spoken about this before, we have to be very aware of our actions and what they lead to. For example, taking a nap could be a godly thing, or taking a nap could be a non-godly thing. Because taking a nap in the right time, when you really just need to refresh, you give yourself that time, and you're doing it because at the end of the nap, you'll get up, you'll wake up, you'll be more refreshed and more ready to do your avodas Hashem. Beautiful and wonderful. But as I joked about yesterday, a lazy Sunday where you literally take a nap all day, and at the end of the nap, you don't feel refreshed. You feel more groggy, you feel more out of it, and you want to just keep rolling over and taking another nap and taking another nap and taking another nap. The end result, again, you have to see where the beginning connects to the end, right? We talk about this a lot in Chassidus, how the beginning connects to the end. So we have to see where this is going to lead us. Is this action going to lead us to a positive outcome, or is this action going to lead us to a sluggish, down feeling outcome, right? At the end of the day, when you put your head on your pillow, are you going to be proud of how many naps you took today? However you answer that will help you try and decipher whether this nap is coming from a good place or not a good place. So too with news, so too with, eating certain foods, making whatever life decisions you need to make. Think about what you're going to feel like and how it's going to affect you by the end of that. Okay. We also spoke about the concept that the leader of the generation, we spoke about the concept that I said we're going to go through topics. The Friedrich Rebbe is going to delve deeply into them. We're going to analyze them, think about them, and then we're going to stick our heads back out of, that depth and realize how it all fits in. So we are speaking about emunah, right? Emunah and bitachon, but primarily at this point we're talking about emunah. And then we brought it up in the beginning of Parak Beis that that Moshe is called Raya Mehemda. Raya Mehemna. He's a faithful shepherd, or a shepherd of faith, and therefore there is that concept that Moshe gives us emunah, and we have to understand this better. So there's a pasuk where it says Moshe, Moshe, and there is no cantillation of a pause in between the first name Moshe and the second name Moshe. It's just Moshe, Moshe, as opposed to in other examples where it's Avram, comma, not literally comma. Again, we're talking about Torah, so it's not literally comma, but it's Avram. Take a comma, pause. Avraham, Yaakov, Yaakov, Shmuel, Shmuel, and all these times it has this cantillation mark, which makes us pause in between the two names. And in the Zayar, we explain that when there's a separation, it means, meaning a separation, a pause, cantillation mark in between them, it means that the source of their neshama is different, not different because one's black and one's blue. We're talking about, nuances in spirituality, meaning it went through a process from the source to the actual parts, so the actual neshama that's here down below, and they don't, as much as they're connected and they're one because they're connected, the actual, the actual ramification, the actual way that the neshama expresses itself in this world, it's different. As opposed to Moshe, which is literally Moshe, Moshe, no pause, and therefore the source of his neshama and the source of his neshama, in its source, and the neshama that is here below is the exact same, no change whatsoever. And we spoke about how the pasuk states that that Moshe came with this level of perfection. It says when he was born, Yocheved said she saw that he was good. And we see that we can interpret that to mean that the house was filled with light the Moshe was born, and that this concept is true, that there's the level, the neshama of Moshe here below is the exact same as it is in its source. So I want to give you guys a taste of what's coming up, because I want to make it very clear, because again we're jumping from one topic, we're going deeply into a different topic, and I want to make sure we don't get lost in the process. Okay? So we discussed this concept that there are two types of souls. There are the souls that come to this world to rectify and to purify and to refine the body, right? Like many of us who have struggled to figure out whether watching the news is coming from a good place or not coming from a good place, whether taking that nap is coming from a good place or not coming from a good place, whether, whatever, all these, we're trying to refine, we're trying to elevate, we're trying to raise up our bodies. We're trying to raise up our nefesh Bahamas, and it's a work that needs to be done. And Baruch Hashem, we have the great schus to be in this world to come and do this work. It's a great shluchus, right? That said, there are other neshamas who come to this world, and the neshama in of itself is perfect. And then they're, in a certain sense, you could say they're tzaddikim, that they come to this world not to rectify themselves. They themselves are perfect, but they're here to help us. They're here to instill something in us. They're here to give us the strength to help us rectify ourselves. And so therefore, we're able to understand that these two types of neshamas there's a difference in them, and we're able to appreciate how Moshe, this concept that Moshe is perfect, it means that his neshama is here at the time, whatever, we always talk in the Chassidus about the Moshe of every generation, but I'm saying that Moshe's neshama came down to be able to help us, to feed and sustain us in our munah and all of these things. Now, we're going to discuss the difference between Avram and Moshe, in the sense that Avram does have a pause, cantillation in between the two names, right? So we're going to bring in, and I want to encourage everybody over Shabbos, if you want to learn Igeres HaKodesh, the 15th, I always have a hard time saying it, epistle, but in Tanya. So here we're going to discuss it more in depth. If you go, it's technically, I'm pretty sure the the Chetas Tanya for Chai Elul on a regular schedule. So if you're going to look it up on Shabbos and review it, it'll help make a lot more sense of what the Frierdiker Rebbe is bringing in here. But the concept that we're going to discuss is the difference between the neshama as it is in its source and the neshama as it is once it comes down. So that once we have that difference, we're able to appreciate it, then we're able to see how amazing it is that Moshe's neshama is pristine, exactly as it was as it is, up above. That's exactly the neshama that Moshe has down below. And so we're able to appreciate the difference between Moshe and Avraham in that sense, by appreciating the difference between wood in of itself and the ashes left of the wood after a fire. So we have to realize, and many of us may know this because we've learned Tanya and we've understood this, but I want to do an introduction just in case. The concept goes like this. Every single thing in the world is created from 4 elements. There is fire, water, earth, and air. And what's funny about it is that it depends on the ratio of the mixture about what it comes. I mean, obviously, all of this is made out of Hashem, and we've had this discussion about Hashem. We call it Hashem Play-Doh. Hashem makes everything, and every single thing is Hashem. But again, Hashem, through Seder Shtalshus, through the Metzamtzim, through this process of creating things from himself. So there are 4 elements. There are fire, water, earth, and air. And so therefore, when something has the mixture of the 4, whatever ratio of the mixture of the 4, it creates something else. So therefore, there's wood, and then there's paper. There is fire. There's a tree connected to its source, and then there's ashes after the tree has been burnt. Right. So what we're going to discuss is the fact that a tree in of itself, or a piece of wood, has earth, air, fire, and water. But meanwhile, when fire touches it and when it burns it, that reaction of the fire burns out. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed, when you put fire on a piece of wood, you start to see that any type of moisture that was within it starts to bubble out. So maybe today, when you light your match for your Shabbos candles, take a moment to just look at the match, and you'll see that there's teeny tiny little bubbles, usually of, even if the wood is dry, there's a certain level of moisture, there's a certain sense of water that's already within that piece of wood, and that burns out. The air, the oxygen within it also burns out, and obviously the fire is taking the fire, it's connecting to the fire and taking that fire. And so therefore, at the end, what's really mostly left of a piece of wood once it's burned is this level of just the mamashas, the earthiness of it. And that's what we're going to discuss. The fact is that the difference between Avram's source, Avram's neshama in its source, is just as different as if it's the wood, and the ashes that are left, that's what it feels like to have the neshama here down below. So the difference between the neshama and its source and the neshama here below is comparable to the difference between a piece of wood, actual wood, and a piece of ashes after the wood is burnt. Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're getting that clarity, and then we're going to discuss that topic, and we're going to understand it in relation to this whole concept of feeding our emunah, and then we're going to continue. Okay, I just want to make sure nobody gets lost. Page 51. This is also the difference between Avram and Moshe. Avram, Avram, is read with a pause in the cantillation, whereas Moshe is read without a pause in the cantillation. This is because the manner in which Avram's soul existed in the world of Bria, right? So we did a whole thing about worlds in previous Maimarim, so the world of Bria, and the manner in which Avram's soul existed in the world of Atzilus are not the same nature. So Atzilus is above, so even between just Atzilus and the world of Bria, Avram's neshama is already different. It has already had a change. As our Rebbe of blessed memory, the Alter Rebbe, writes in the Gersa Kodesh, Epistle 15, citing the teaching that he heard from his master, the Maggid of Mizrich, on the pasuk, I am dust and ashes, right? So Avram Avinu writes, I am dust and ashes, and the Maggid of Mezrich gives this explanation on it, and then the Alter Rebbe puts that as part of the letters in Igeres HaKodesh, chapter 15. Please, if you are able to on Shabbos, it'd be really, really helpful. Our forefather Abraham made the statement about the radiance of his soul, which shined in his body from the light of supernal chesed, right? So we know that Abraham has a relation, very, very strong relation to chesed, and he said that as much as the supernal chesed in its source, he's comparing himself, I am dust and ashes. So supernal chesed in its source is what it is, and Avram, as much as he was such a strong, incredible representation of chesed, the comparison is as if Avram's chesed is as dust and ashes. This attribute, the attribute of Ava Rabbah, the abundant love that derives from the sphere called Chesed of Atzilus, was identified in him. So we know, we can always, Chassidus talks about this a lot, that Avram represents Chesed and Ava, and Yitzchak represents Gevura and Yira, right? And Yaakov represents Tiferes. So as much as he is the representation of Ava Rabbah, that's in comparison to the Ava that is, the source of love, the source of chesed that's in its source, it's as if it's a piece of wood in comparison to a ashes. For he loved Hashem with a love so great and sublime that he became a chariot for Hashem. Avram's degree of nullification, of bittul to Hashem, was like that of a chariot to its driver, having no independent will whatsoever. This is even greater than the subservience of a slave to his master, for the slave nevertheless retains the will of his own, albeit subservient to the master's will, right? So we're saying that Avram's love, Avram's Ava, Avram's chesed was so powerful that he literally did exactly as he was told. He was a regular car, not a Tesla, right? A Tesla, they have a mind of their own, but a regular car, you can't say the car drives itself. Exactly, it drives as the driver tells it to. So he was a chariot, exactly where the conductor sent him, that's where he went, as opposed to somebody who's a slave. If somebody tells me, go do this, I will have a desire, I'll have an opinion about whether I want or I don't want to do it, but I'll do it anyway. But no, Avram had such love, had such ava, that he literally, Hashem said jump and he jumped. One might possibly assume that the type of chesed and love that exists above in the supernal spheres is of a similar nature to the attribute of abundant love exemplified by our father Avram, peace be upon him. It is only that it surpasses infinitely. So not only do we realize that Avram's love was so powerful that he's like a chariot to Hashem, but even in comparison, how much more so the source of his neshama, how much more so it has a higher level of chesed. It surpasses it infinitely. For it is known of the supernal middays that though their mode of emanation is finite, they themselves are infinite and limitless, because the infinite Ein Sof light actually radiates and is vested within them. And he and his kalim, in other words, the vessels of the spheres, are one. Just as he is infinite, so too are they. However, this is not the case regarding the soul of a man, which is vested in corporality in man's body. Its attributes are finite and limited. So as much as the source of our neshama, or let's say the source of Avram's neshama, was the source of chesed, right? The chesed of Atzilus, it's the infiniteness of chesed at that point, it's a hard concept to understand. But that same chesed, once it comes down and down and down and down and down, and goes through like all the gradations, it goes through all the levels of Seder Shtalshlus, it's still incredible chesed, to the point that we see he was a chariot. But even that, the comparison is just, it's hard to believe that there's such a comparison. Until now, the Alter Rebbe has explained that the supernal sphere of chesed is infinitely higher than Avram's attribute of love in this world. Now, in order to negate any comparison whatsoever, he goes on to state that Avram's attribute of love is infinitely lower than the supernal sphere of chesed. 1 second. Okay, so I don't want to start this next section. Next, on Sunday, Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to start on page 50, on the bottom of page 52. So what we said was how Avram's chesed, how Avram's love, and this, the neshama, Avram's neshama in this world at that time was the epitome of chesed. Just like a car doesn't drive on its own, unlike a Tesla, a regular car doesn't drive on its own. The reality is that Avram did exactly as Hashem said. He was a chariot. Hashem said jump, Avram jumped. Hashem said go, Avram went. Right? Now, in relation, that type of love, that type of chesed, that type of bond that Avram had for Hashem, that type of love, even though his neshama comes from the source of chesed, it's incomparable to the source of chesed. It's gradation after gradation after gradation, to the point that neshama was able to come into this world, right? So we're able to see the difference in that sense. And we're able to, and this gives us an appreciation about how incredible it is that Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama was pristine. The same neshama that was above is the same neshama that was below. And we're able to appreciate that by seeing that as much as Avram's chesed was the epitome of chesed, it wasn't actually the epitome of chesed within the, chesed of Ein Sof. It was very different. So we're able to appreciate that the neshama of the Nasi Ador, of the Moshe Rabbeinu of our generation, is so incredibly high that it literally is just as pristine as it was then as it is now. And we're able to, again, I'm giving you guys a bit of like a heads up, we're able to, by connecting to that source of that neshama, by learning about, the Moshe Rabbeinu, the actual Moshe Rabbeinu of that time, and the Moshe Rabbeinu of our generation, and each one of our generations, we're able to feed and sustain our emunah. So I want to give everyone a bracha. We should have a beautiful Shabbos where we hopefully think about these concepts, where we learn about the Rebbe, where we think about, what that means. As we say, would the Rebbe do such a thing? What would the Rebbe think if I were to do? Because we have to realize that the Rebbe's neshama is pristine, exactly as it was above, is exactly as it is below. And let's try and emulate that. Let's try and connect to that. Good Shabbos, everybody.